Rain poured from the dark sky, falling in long silver lines under the flickering streetlights. The air was cold enough to make breath turn into small white clouds. Jack walked with his hands deep in his coat pockets, head slightly down to avoid the wet wind. His boots splashed in shallow puddles on the empty street. It was late, and most shops had closed, their metal shutters rattling softly in the wind. The neon lights of the alien district glowed faintly through the mist, their strange symbols dancing in the rain. The sound of footsteps made him slow down. They were light, quick, and uneven, like someone small trying to catch up. He glanced over his shoulder. At first, he saw nothing, just shadows moving between the buildings. Then she appeared from the corner of a side alley, a small alien girl, no older than 12 in human years. Her skin was pale blue, almost silver under the streetlight. Her hair, wet and sticking to her cheeks, looked like soft strands of dark silk. She hugged a thin cloth bag to her chest, the fabric worn and soaked through. Her clothes were torn at the sleeves, and her bare feet left small splashes on the wet pavement. She stopped a few steps away from him, breathing fast, her large eyes shining with fear and desperation. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the rain falling between them. "Be my dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I won't misbehave." Jack blinked, not sure if he heard her right. He had never seen her before, yet her words felt heavy, like they carried more than just a child's request. She looked around nervously, as if someone might appear at any moment. He asked her name. She hesitated before answering. Lyra. Her voice was so soft it was almost lost in the rain. She explained in broken sentences that her father was gone, and her stepmother had thrown her out. She had no food, no place to stay, and no one who would take her in. She hadn't eaten for 2 days. Her thin shoulders shook in the cold. Jack could see how her hands clutched the cloth bag like it was the only thing she had left in the world. Inside, there was probably nothing worth stealing. Maybe a few clothes, maybe something that reminded her of her father. Jack wanted to say something, but before he could, Lyra's eyes widened. She looked past him, her gaze locked on something at the end of the street. Jack turned his head and saw 2 tall figures stepping out from the shadows. They were not human. Their skin was dark gray, their eyes glowing faint yellow in the rain. Both wore long black coats, and under them, Jack could see the faint shine of metal weapons. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice breaking. "My stepmother's guards." The 2 figures started walking toward them. Slow, confident steps. Their eyes never left Lyra. Jack understood immediately. If they reached her, she wouldn't come back. The girl's legs tensed like she was about to run, but her exhaustion was clear. If she tried to flee alone, they would catch her in seconds. The cold wind bit into Jack's face as he thought quickly. This was none of his business. He didn't know her. He didn't know her stepmother. But he knew what would happen if he turned his back. He had seen enough of this city's dark side to know how these stories ended. The guards moved closer, their hands now free of their coat pockets. The rain seemed to fall heavier, masking the sound of their steps, but not the feeling of danger they brought with them. Lyra's voice was almost too soft to hear when she spoke again. "Please, don't leave me." Something in her voice, fear mixed with hope, made Jack's jaw tighten. He looked at the guards, then back at her. Without another word, he stepped forward, closing the small distance between them. Her eyes met his for a split second before he reached out and grabbed her hand. "Come on," he said sharply. She stumbled as he pulled her along, her bare feet splashing through puddles. They turned sharply into a narrow side alley, the smell of wet stone and rusted metal filling the air. Behind them, the sound of footsteps quickened. The guards were following. The alley twisted and narrowed, lit only by a few dim lamps hanging crooked from old wires. Jack knew this part of the district. Too many dead ends, too many blind corners. He had to choose the right path, or they'd be trapped. He pushed Lyra ahead of him at one turn, then pulled her back at another. They reached a half-broken metal gate. Jack shoved it open with his shoulder, the screech of rusted hinges echoing in the rain. Beyond it was another street, darker, quieter. They ran across it, blending into the shadows between 2 abandoned buildings. Jack pressed his back to the cold wall, pulling Lyra close so she wouldn't be visible from the street. They stayed silent, listening. The guards passed by the alley's entrance, their heads turning side to side, scanning the darkness. One of them stopped, sniffed the air, then kept walking. Only when their footsteps faded did Jack let out the breath he'd been holding. Lyra was shaking, her small hands gripping his coat tightly. She didn't speak, but her eyes said enough. She was terrified, but she trusted him now. Jack looked down the street. The night was far from over, and those guards would be back. He had just made a choice that could change his life, and maybe hers too. The rain still fell, but now it felt different, heavier, more urgent, like the city itself was warning him. He didn't know what trouble he had just pulled into his life, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let go of her hand. Not tonight. Not while danger still hunted her. Jack closed the apartment door quietly, locking it twice before sliding the heavy bolt into place. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor as he took it off and hung it on a hook. Lyra stood in the middle of the small living room, her eyes moving from one object to another as if she had stepped into a different world. The walls were lined with shelves full of human tools, books, and strange gadgets she didn't recognize. A faint smell of old coffee and machine oil filled the air. She touched the corner of a small table, running her fingers along the smooth wood. Her wet hair clung to her cheeks, and her clothes were still damp from the rain. Jack pointed to the bathroom and told her to dry off. She hesitated, as if unsure whether she was allowed. Only when he gave a small nod did she slowly walk toward the door. While she was inside, Jack heated some food. The cupboards were not full. He lived alone and didn't keep much, but he found bread, soup, and a packet of dried fruit. The sound of the shower running was faint behind the bathroom door. For a moment, he wondered what kind of mess he had just brought into his life. He had no plan, no idea how deep the trouble might go. When Lyra came out, she was wearing one of his old shirts. It hung loosely on her small frame, the sleeves covering her hands. Her hair was still wet but cleaner now. She looked shy, almost afraid to sit down, but the smell of soup made her take a step closer to the table. Jack placed the bowl in front of her without a word. She stared at it for a moment before picking up the spoon. Her first bite was small, but after tasting it, she ate faster, like someone afraid the food might vanish. "I can work," she said between mouthfuls. "I can clean, fix things, anything you want. I won't be trouble." Jack leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You don't have to earn food," he said. "You're safe here, for now." Her eyes lifted to his, unsure if she should believe him. She looked like she wanted to say more, but stayed quiet. She ate until the bowl was empty, then carefully placed the spoon down as if afraid to make noise. Jack gave her a blanket and pointed to the couch. "You can sleep there tonight." She nodded and wrapped the blanket tightly around herself. Her eyes stayed open, scanning the room as though she expected someone to break in at any moment. The quiet was broken by a sudden heavy knock at the door. Both of them froze. The knock came again, harder this time. A deep voice called out, "We know she's here. Open the door." Lyra's grip on the blanket tightened. She shook her head rapidly, whispering, "Please, don't open it." Jack stood and moved silently to the door. Without unlocking it, he leaned close and spoke through the wood. "Wrong place. Get lost." The voice on the other side laughed. "You think you can hide her from us? We're not going away, human." Another knock, this one so hard the door rattled. Jack's mind raced. If they broke in, there would be no escape. His building was quiet at night. No one would come to help. "I'll call the human embassy," Jack said, raising his voice so it carried through the door. "Do you want them to hear about this?" There was silence for a moment, then the sound of footsteps moving away down the hall. Jack stayed still, listening. Only when he heard the faint slam of the stairwell door did he turn back toward the living room. Lyra was sitting up, eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "She won't let me go." Jack sat across from her. "Why? Why does she want you so badly?" Lyra hesitated. Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. "Because of my father. He had land, important land. When he died, it was supposed to be mine when I'm older, but if I disappear—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Jack understood. The thought made his jaw tighten. He had seen greed before, but going after a child for property, it was lower than anything he'd expected. "You're safe tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow, we'll figure something out." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, as if testing whether he meant it. Then she lay down on the couch, pulling the blanket over her head. Her small frame curled up tight, like she was trying to make herself invisible. Jack turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of a small lamp by the couch. He went to his bedroom, but left the door slightly open. He knew sleep wouldn't come easily, not with the memory of those knocks still echoing in his head. In the darkness, he heard the faint sound of her breathing, slow and uneven. She was trying not to cry. Jack closed his eyes, thinking about what the next day might bring. He had no plan yet, but one thing was clear. If they came back, he wouldn't hand her over. Morning light crept through the blinds, drawing thin, golden lines across the small apartment. Jack woke early, his body still tense from the night before. The memory of the heavy knocks on his door was fresh in his mind. He got up quietly and walked into the living room. Lyra was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the couch with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her eyes followed him, wary but calmer than last night. He made some coffee for himself and gave her a cup of warm milk. She held it with both hands, sipping slowly. The silence stretched for a few minutes before Jack spoke. "We can't keep doing this. Those men will be back." Lyra lowered her gaze. "They'll never stop," she said softly. "She will keep sending them until I'm gone." Jack leaned on the table. "Why not go to the authorities?" "They won't help me," Lyra replied. "She has money, friends in the council. They'll believe her before they believe me." Jack thought for a moment. He knew the alien city's laws were complicated, and humans had little influence here. But he also knew there were legal ways to protect someone, if you found the right loophole. "There's one way," Lyra said after a pause. "Guardianship papers. If you were my legal guardian, she couldn't take me." Jack frowned. "I'm not your family." "In alien law," Lyra explained, "there is another way, a life contract. It's like adoption, but it's for survival. The guardian takes responsibility until the child reaches adulthood. It's permanent." Jack's first instinct was to refuse. Permanent? He had met her less than a day ago, but the thought of those guards dragging her away tightened his chest. "What does it take?" he asked. "We have to register at the Central Hall," she said. "Both of us must sign in front of an official. Once it's done, no one, not even my stepmother, can break it." Jack nodded slowly. "Then we do that." Lyra's eyes lit with hope, but it didn't last long. Her shoulders sank. "She'll try to stop us. If she knows we're going there, she'll send someone." As if on cue, a faint scratching sound came from outside the window. Jack moved quickly, peering through the blinds. Across the street, a figure stood leaning against a wall, pretending to smoke. The coat, the posture, it was too similar to the guards from last night. "They're watching," Jack said. Lyra's fingers gripped the blanket tighter. "It's her spy. If we leave, he'll follow." Jack's mind worked fast. "Then we need to make them think we're staying put." He went to the kitchen, grabbed a piece of paper, and wrote something down. He handed it to Lyra. "If anything happens, if we get separated, meet me at this place. It's safe." She nodded and tucked the paper into her bag. Hours passed slowly. Jack pretended to fix things around the apartment while Lyra read an old book from his shelf, but both kept glancing toward the window. When the shadows outside grew longer, Jack noticed the spy was gone. That was their chance. They left through the back exit, moving quickly down narrow alleys. Jack kept a hand on Lyra's shoulder, guiding her through streets only locals used. For a while, it seemed they were clear. Then, as they turned a corner, a tall alien man stepped into their path. His sharp eyes locked on Lyra. "Going somewhere?" Before Jack could respond, the man pressed a small device on his wrist. A light flashed, and somewhere in the distance, an answering signal blinked. He had just called for backup. Jack stepped in front of Lyra. "She's under human protection. Touch her, and you answer to the embassy." The alien laughed. "You think your human rules mean anything here? She belongs to her family." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Jack said, his voice cold. The man moved closer, but a group of locals appeared at the end of the street, their chatter filling the air. The alien froze, clearly unwilling to cause a scene in front of witnesses. He gave Jack one last look, full of warning, before melting back into the shadows. They kept moving, faster now, until the tall spire of the Central Hall came into view. It was a massive building of white stone and glass, guarded by both alien and human officials. Lyra's steps slowed as they approached, as if afraid it was too good to be true. Inside, the hall was busy with people filing documents, speaking with clerks, and waiting in long lines. Jack led her to the registration desk. The clerk, a middle-aged alien woman with golden eyes, scanned them both. "Reason for life contract?" she asked. "Protection," Jack said firmly. The clerk raised an eyebrow but handed them 2 forms. Jack began to fill his out, but Lyra's hands were shaking as she wrote her name. Halfway through, a shadow fell across the desk. Jack looked up to see a man in an expensive black coat, sharp features, cold smile. "This girl is under the care of her stepmother. She's leaving with me." The clerk froze, unsure what to do. The man pulled out a document with a family seal. "Here's the proof." Lyra's voice trembled, but she spoke. "That's fake. He works for her." The man leaned closer to Jack. "Walk away now, human. You don't know who you're dealing with." Jack ignored him and slid the completed forms across the desk. "Register them." The man's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." Before he could act, 2 human security officers stepped forward from a side corridor. They positioned themselves beside Jack, their hands resting near their sidearms. The man glared but stepped back, disappearing into the crowd. The clerk stamped the papers and handed them over. "It's done. She is now under your legal guardianship." Lyra let out a breath she had been holding for hours. For the first time since they met, Jack saw a small, genuine smile on her face. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. The stepmother wouldn't give up so easily. The wind outside howled against the apartment windows, carrying the faint smell of rain and metal from the streets below. Lyra sat at the table, tracing her finger along the edge of her new guardianship paper. It was still strange to her. One signature and a stamp, and now she was safe. At least, that's what she wanted to believe. Jack was across the room, working on a broken lamp, but his eyes kept flicking toward the door every few minutes. He knew too well that paper didn't stop someone determined enough. Lyra stood and said she wanted to go to the market to buy food for dinner. Jack hesitated, but finally gave her a few credits and told her to stay close. She promised she would. Pulling on her coat, she left the apartment, her small figure disappearing into the busy street below. The market was alive with noise and color, vendors shouting prices, steam rising from food stalls, the smell of spices mixing with the scent of rain on stone. Lyra kept her hood up and her head low as she moved from stall to stall, buying vegetables and bread. She tried to blend into the crowd, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. When she looked over her shoulder, her stomach tightened. A tall alien man in a gray coat stood a few stalls away, pretending to examine fruit. His eyes, however, never left her. She turned away quickly and walked faster, but her heart was pounding. She could hear footsteps behind her, matching her pace. She left the market, taking a side street, hoping to lose him. The alley smelled of damp stone and old trash, the walls high and narrow. But halfway through, the footsteps quickened. Lyra glanced back. The man was closer now, his face cold and expressionless. Panic took over, and she began to run. Her bag banged against her side, bread and vegetables nearly spilling out. The alley opened into a quiet square, and she saw no one around to help. The man was closing the distance when suddenly a hand grabbed her wrist. Not his, but Jack's. He had been following from a different direction, worried she might be in danger. Without a word, he pulled her behind him. The man in the gray coat stopped a few steps away. "That girl doesn't belong to you," he said in a flat voice. "She's under my guardianship," Jack replied, his voice steady. "If you want to test that, go ahead." The man smirked, revealing a thin scar on his jaw. "You think that paper will save her? It won't." Jack didn't move. "Then you'll have to get through me." The man's hand twitched toward the inside of his coat, but before he could pull anything, Jack stepped forward quickly. His sudden movement made the man hesitate. Jack didn't wait for another chance. He shoved him back hard, enough to knock him into the wall. Without looking back, Jack took Lyra's arm and started running. They darted through side streets until Jack was sure they weren't being followed. By the time they reached the apartment, his breathing was heavy. Lyra was pale, clutching the bag tightly like it was a lifeline. Inside, Jack set the bag on the table and crouched in front of her. "You're not leaving alone again. Understand?" She nodded quickly, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry, I didn't know he was there." "It's not your fault," Jack said. "It's theirs." As he stood, his shoulder ached sharply. He rolled it, realizing he must have strained it when he shoved the man. Lyra noticed and frowned. "You're hurt." It's nothing, he said. But she didn't look convinced. She got a small cloth and pressed it against his shoulder gently. You shouldn't get hurt because of me, she whispered. Jack gave her a tired smile. That's what guardians are for. The quiet moment was broken by a loud metallic clink outside the window. Jack moved to the side and peeked through the blinds. A small, sleek drone hovered just beyond the glass, its red light blinking slowly. It wasn't a delivery drone. This one was a scout, used to mark locations. As soon as Jack spotted it, it flew upward and vanished into the night sky. A minute later, a faint buzz from the apartment's console announced an incoming message. Jack opened it cautiously. The screen flickered to life, showing a simple line of text. Give her back or we take you both. The letters faded, replaced by an image, a live feed from the street outside. Two shadowy figures were standing near the building's entrance, faces hidden under hoods. Lyra saw it and stepped closer, her voice shaking. She found us. Jack turned off the console and locked every bolt on the door. Then we make sure she doesn't get what she wants. That night, the apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of danger outside. Jack stayed by the window, watching for movement, while Lyra sat curled up on the couch, the blanket tight around her. Every sound in the street made them tense. The hum of a passing bike, the hiss of the wind through narrow alleys, the low murmur of voices below. Hours passed without the figures moving. It was a waiting game now, and Jack knew they couldn't win it by staying here forever. Something had to change. The first light of dawn touched the city, but it brought no comfort. Jack had stayed awake most of the night, watching the street from behind the blinds. The two hooded figures were gone, but that didn't mean the danger had passed. Lyra woke up quietly, her small hands clutching the blanket as if letting go would make her disappear. Jack knew they couldn't stay here. Get your things, he said. We're leaving. Lyra looked unsure. Where? To the human consulate. If they take you in, she can't touch you. It didn't take long to pack. Lyra had almost nothing, just the clothes Jack had given her and the small cloth bag she carried when they met. They left the apartment through the back exit, sticking to narrow alleys and avoiding the main roads. Jack kept scanning behind them, ready for trouble. The human consulate was a tall, clean building with glass doors and guards in uniform. Jack felt a small rush of relief when they stepped inside. The air smelled of coffee and fresh paper, the sound of quiet typing filling the lobby. A clerk greeted them politely. Jack explained the situation, showing the guardianship papers and asking for protection. The clerk listened carefully, then checked something on her console. Her face changed. I'm sorry, she said. We've been instructed not to take custody in this case. Jack's jaw tightened. Instructed by who? She didn't answer, but Jack could see it in her eyes. Someone had been paid to make sure they got nothing here. Lyra's shoulders sank. She's everywhere, she whispered. Jack thanked the clerk through clenched teeth and took Lyra's hand. They walked out quickly, knowing they had just lost their safest option. They moved fast, trying to put distance between themselves and the consulate. Jack knew the stepmother's people would guess their destination, and it wouldn't be long before they caught up. By midday, the streets grew quieter, the buildings older and more worn. The smell of rust and oil filled the air. Jack led Lyra into the entrance of the old industrial tunnels, long abandoned passages beneath the city. The air inside was cool and damp, the sound of dripping water echoing off the metal walls. Are we safe here? Lyra asked, her voice small. For now, Jack said. Not many people know these tunnels. We can hide until I figure something out. They walked deeper, past rusted pipes and broken machinery. Old warning signs, written in both human and alien languages, hung crooked on the walls. Jack found a small maintenance room with a metal door they could lock from the inside. They sat down, sharing the little food they had left. Lyra was quiet, staring at the floor. After a while, she spoke. I can help you. I'm not useless. Jack frowned. You're not useless, Lyra. She shook her head. No, I mean I can really help. My father used to work with the city's security systems. He taught me how to read their codes. If we can get into my stepmother's records, I can prove what she did to him. Jack's interest sharpened. You can do that? She nodded. If we can get to a terminal with high-level access. Jack thought about it. If they could get proof, the authorities wouldn't be able to ignore it, no matter how much money her stepmother had. It was risky, but staying hidden forever wasn't an option. "All right," he said. "Then that's the plan. We get proof. We take it straight to the alien court." Lyra's eyes brightened with determination. For the first time, she didn't look like a frightened child. She looked ready to fight. Hours passed in the quiet of the maintenance room. They rested in shifts, always listening for footsteps in the tunnels. At one point, Jack heard faint voices and the sound of boots on metal, but they faded without coming closer. When night fell again, Jack studied a map of the city he had found in an old locker. He traced a route with his finger. "Her estate's main office will have the kind of terminal we need," he said. "We'll have to get in and out fast." Lyra leaned over the map. "The south side has an old servant's gate. If it's still there, it won't be as guarded as the main entrance." Jack nodded. "Then that's our way in." Before they slept, he checked the door lock twice. He could feel the weight of what was coming. They were no longer just hiding. They were preparing to strike back. And once they started, there would be no turning back. The night was cold and silent when Jack and Lyra left the tunnels. They moved through back streets, their steps quick but careful. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, and the hum of traffic was far away. Jack carried a small pack with tools, a flashlight, and a piece of wire he might need for locks. Lyra kept her hood up, her eyes scanning every shadow. They reached the outskirts of her stepmother's estate just before midnight. The high walls were made of dark stone, topped with sharp metal spikes that glistened under the pale light of the moons. A few guards patrolled near the main gates, their weapons hanging at their sides. Jack didn't slow down to watch them. Instead, he led Lyra around the outer wall until they found the south side. Just as Lyra had remembered, there was an old servant's gate, rusted, partly hidden by overgrown vines. Jack crouched and examined the lock. "Not hard," he murmured. He worked quickly, the metal clicking softly under his hands. Within seconds, the gate creaked open, the hinges groaning in protest. They slipped inside, moving through a narrow path lined with empty storage sheds. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Lyra kept close behind Jack, her small steps making barely any noise. Every now and then, she glanced up at the large windows of the estate, where dim lights flickered in the distance. Jack stopped at the side of the main building. "Where's your father's office?" "Second floor, east wing," she whispered. "It's locked, but I can open it." They moved along the shadows until they found a side door. Jack picked the lock, and they entered a quiet hallway. The floor was covered in thick carpet, muffling their footsteps. The air inside was warmer, filled with the faint scent of expensive perfume and old books. They climbed a set of stairs, careful to avoid the creaky steps. On the second floor, the hall stretched long and silent. Lyra pointed to a heavy wooden door at the far end. "That's it." Jack nodded and kept watch while she worked on the lock. Her fingers moved quickly over the keypad, entering a series of numbers only she would know. The door clicked, and they slipped inside. The office was exactly as she remembered it. Large desk, shelves full of data chips, and her father's old chair still pushed neatly in place. A dim lamp cast soft light over the room. Lyra went straight to the desk and began searching through the drawers. She found a small silver key and slid it into a hidden compartment. A panel opened, revealing a secure terminal. She sat down, her fingers flying across the keys. Lines of alien script scrolled across the screen. "I'm in," she whispered. "Now I just need to find the files." Jack stood by the door, listening for any sound in the hallway. Every creak of the old building made his muscles tense. He glanced at Lyra. Her face was focused, the light from the screen reflecting in her eyes. After a few minutes, she gasped. "I found it. A recording from the night my father died." She played it, and they both listened in silence. The voice of her stepmother filled the room, cold and sharp. "Make it look like an accident. When she's gone, the land will be ours." The file ended. Lyra's hands shook as she copied it onto a small data chip. This is enough to destroy her. Before Jack could answer, a sudden noise echoed from the hall, footsteps fast and heavy. Lyra froze. Jack grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the desk. The door handle rattled violently, and then the door burst open. Her stepmother stood there, tall and dressed in a dark gown, her eyes full of fury. Behind her, 2 armed guards filled the doorway. "So," she said in a low, dangerous voice, "the little thief came home." Jack stepped in front of Lyra, his body blocking her from view. "We have what we need," he said. "It's over." Her stepmother's smile was cold. "It's not over until I say it's over." She raised her hand, and the guards stepped forward. Jack moved first, shoving the desk toward them. The heavy wood crashed into their legs, giving him just enough time to pull Lyra through the side window onto the narrow balcony. Cold air rushed over them as they scrambled along the ledge. Shouts erupted inside the office, and the guards began to follow. Jack and Lyra reached the end of the balcony, where an old ladder led down to the garden. They climbed quickly, the metal groaning under their weight. The moment their feet hit the grass, they ran. Behind them, the guards spilled out of the house, their voices growing louder. The estate's lights flared to life, flooding the gardens with harsh white light. They darted back toward the servants' gate, the path seeming longer than before. Jack could hear the pounding footsteps closing in. Just as they reached the gate, one guard lunged forward, grabbing Lyra's arm. Jack turned sharply, slamming his shoulder into the guard's chest. The man stumbled back, and Jack pushed Lyra through the gate first, before slipping out himself. He pulled it shut and jammed a piece of metal into the lock, buying them precious seconds. They didn't stop running until the estate was far behind them, swallowed by the night. Lyra clutched the data chip in her hand like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Jack glanced at her and said, "Now we take this to the people who can end her." Her stepmother's furious voice still echoed in his ears, but Jack knew the fight was almost over. One last move, and Lyra would finally be free. The city streets were still dark when Jack and Lyra reached the human embassy gates. Their breaths came fast, not only from running, but from the weight of what they carried. The embassy walls were tall and guarded by armed officers in gray uniforms. Jack called out, holding up the guardianship paper in one hand and the small data chip in the other. Two guards approached, their eyes sharp. "State your business." Jack spoke clearly. "We have proof of a murder, an alien citizen, Lyra's father. The killer is her stepmother. This chip holds the evidence. We need this delivered to the alien high court immediately." The guards exchanged looks, then motioned for them to follow. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the hum of voices and the faint smell of polished floors. They were led to a secure room where a human official waited behind a desk. Jack placed the chip on the table and explained everything: how he met Lyra, the threats, the night raids, and how they had retrieved the recording. The official inserted the chip into a console. Lyra's stepmother's voice filled the room. The cold words about making her father's death look like an accident made the official's expression harden. "This is enough," he said. "We'll forward it directly to the court." But the relief didn't last. A loud crash echoed from outside the embassy. Jack and Lyra turned toward the sound. Shouts, the pounding of boots. One of the guards burst into the room. "They're here!" he shouted. "Her people!" The official reacted quickly. "Get the girl into the secure wing." Jack grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her down a side corridor. They could hear the clash of weapons behind them, the embassy guards holding off the attackers. The secure wing was protected by reinforced doors, and as soon as they stepped through, the doors sealed shut. Lyra's breathing was fast. "She's not going to stop, is she?" Jack crouched in front of her. "She'll stop when she has no power left, and after today, she won't have any." An hour later, the fighting outside had stopped. Embassy staff confirmed that the attackers had been captured and handed over to human and alien authorities. The data chip had already reached the court. It would be reviewed within the day. By the afternoon, news spread across the city. The alien high court had issued an arrest order for Lyra's stepmother on charges of murder, fraud, and illegal use of armed force. Witnesses reported seeing her dragged from her estate in handcuffs, her expensive gown soaked in rain as the press took images. When the embassy staff told Lyra the news, her hands covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She looked at Jack, unsure if it was real. "It's over?" "It's over," Jack said, his voice steady but warm. The court also declared Lyra's inheritance legally protected under her guardianship with Jack. The land, assets, and her father's personal effects were now hers. But when they gave her the official documents, she didn't even look at them. Instead, she turned to Jack. "I don't care about the land. I just want to stay with you." Jack smiled faintly. "That's already decided. You're not going anywhere." They left the embassy in the early evening. the rain finally gone, leaving the streets clean and glistening under the streetlights. The air felt lighter, almost as if the city itself knew something dark had ended. Lyra walked close to Jack, her small hand gripping his firmly. When they reached the apartment, it didn't feel like just his place anymore. It felt like their home. Jack cooked a simple dinner while Lyra sat at the table, watching him with quiet contentment. After they ate, she stood in the doorway of the living room, holding the blanket he'd given her that first night. "Do you remember when I asked you to be my dad?" she asked softly. Jack looked at her and nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes," she admitted. "I thought maybe you'd give me food and then tell me to leave. But you didn't. You needed someone," Jack said. "And I needed someone too, even if I didn't know it." She smiled, the kind of smile that was rare for her, pure and unguarded. "You're my dad now. Not because of the paper. Because I choose it." Jack's throat felt tight for a moment, but he only nodded. "Then I guess I'm the lucky one." That night, the apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. Lyra slept peacefully on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket, but now without fear. Jack sat nearby, watching the lights of passing air cars through the window. For the first time since meeting her, he didn't feel the constant tension of danger. The fight was over, and they had won. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And Jack knew that from this day on, he wasn't just a man living alone. He was a father.